to this week's episode of the CRICKETher Weekly, brought to you, I was going to say live from Lords, we're recording as live. We've just witnessed the most bonkers 100 final that you could imagine, with Spirit finally coming out the winners against the Fire with just 2 balls remaining, a little bit of Dipti Sharma magic at the end there to win it for the Spirit, but my goodness, they made tough yards of what should have been a relatively straightforward run chase, and yeah, an amazing match really. First up, Sid, we got it totally wrong. Well, I think both of us actually got it totally wrong with our predictions, didn't we? Because I had Invincibles v Fire today, and Invincibles obviously lost the Eliminator yesterday against the Spirit, and I then had Fire as the champions. Well, close but no cigar. And your prediction, I have to say, was even worse. You have the Superchargers here in the final today, and they didn't even make the Eliminator in the end, Sid. So there you go. Just goes to show you can't be right all the time. Anyway, a bonkers final, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's somehow like felt that. You know, Heather Knight and Georgia Redmayne were there, and you know they were going along, and they, of course, in the Eliminator they'd not been dismissed, so they'd finished not out in the Eliminator, and you thought, okay, Spirit are just going to kind of go do what they need to do to get over the line. And then you know, of course, Shabnam Ismail comes back, removes Heather Knight. She got 3 very similar bowled wickets today, which were just like she drilled it in as fast as she could and got those wickets, and it was like, okay, now Fire can do this. They have their opportunity. There was like that chink of light. But it was, for me, it was Danny Gibson that turned the game on its head, really. So, you know, we'd actually been quite critical of Danny Gibson yesterday, and I'd written in my piece about the Eliminator that she'd nearly stuffed it up for the Spirit because she'd been very expensive. I think the second most expensive spell of bowling ever in the women's 100. But she came in today, and she didn't bowl particularly well either, but she came in today and she did the thing that they really needed at that point, which was massively accelerated. She hit like, what was it, 22 runs off 9 balls? Yep. And that was, you know, she then got out, but that was the difference, because from then on, everything they do, they could just manage that chase again and use their smarts and use their intelligence, which is exactly what players like Dipti and, you know, Heather Knight and Georgia Redmayne all have in spades. So at the end, you know, it was the smarts that won it for the Spirit.
That's really interesting, and potentially a critical innings for Danny Gibson ahead of the selection of the T20 World Cup squad for England, Sid, would you say?
Well, yeah, people have been talking in the press box, haven't they, going, is it Danny Gibson or is it Freya Kemp? I mean, you know, Danny Gibson, you know, obviously did have that disappointing performance with the ball, but the good news if you're Danny Gibson is that Freya Kemp hasn't exactly torn things up with the ball either. But having gone in and done that in this pressure situation in front of 22,000 fans we've had in there for the women's game, in front of all those fans, you know, I think that she's really shown that she can soak up those big pressure moments, because, you know, walking out into that situation, that was, you know, really, you know, it's bearing down on you. It's like a ton on top of you, and she handled it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heather Knight in the press conference that I've just been in, the post-match press conference, was really full of praise for Danny Gibson. She said that the way that she came back from that disappointment yesterday to bat like that today just showed the amount of character that she's got. And I guess kind of what you're saying is the sort of mental strength and the capacity to not be cowed by that intense amount of pressure. That was intense anyway, but I guess even more intense for her after knowing that she'd had that disappointment yesterday. So yeah, Heather Knight was certainly very full of praise, and based on what Heather Knight's just said, we'd probably expect her to be on that plane to, I was going to say to Bangladesh, we'll come to that in a minute. Is it going to be a plane to Bangladesh? Yeah, so fantastic for her. Obviously another meerkat match hero winning performance as well from Georgia Redmayne, who's really been, again, kind of one of those players who, you know, is not a great for Australia, but is a great in the 100 now.
Yeah, as a watch, she's never played a game for Australia. She has precisely 0 runs for Australia, having never played a game. You know, but she's come over here and, you know, she's done what was asked of her. And is this another case of the kind of gulf between the Australian system and ours? That, you know, someone who's not even a bit part for Australia, never got to play a game, can come over here and, you know, be, you know, one of the top players in our tournament. She didn't win the player of the tournament, did she? I thought she was a contestant, but that went to Annabelle Sutherland. But nevertheless, Georgia Redmayne had to have been up there. So another great performance from her. Personally, I'd have given the match hero to Gibson, but you know.
Yeah, I guess the other person who maybe figures into what you've just said would be Jess Jonathan, who had a brilliant day today with the bat, really totally rescued Welsh Fire from what would otherwise have been an extremely low total and kind of potentially an extremely one-sided match, turned it into the thriller by her half century. She can't get into the Australia T20 team anymore. Well, potentially she will be able to after that performance if they were watching. But yeah, it absolutely emphasises the depth that Australia have got. People bang on about the 100, showing the depth that English domestic cricket have got, but my goodness, Australia are just, you know, it's a different planet, it's a different plane of existence, Sid.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking of depth, also the depth of the Welsh Fire team, because Jonathan, in hitting 50 runs today, became the 5th Welsh Fire player to hit a 50 in this tournament, which shows that thing again that we talked about, I think, a couple of weeks ago, about how there's so much of a team. It's a collective outfit, and the Welsh Fire didn't quite get over the line today, but you know, they should be proud of their season, and you know, proud of the way the team display that they've put on.
Yeah, that's exactly what Gareth Breeze, the head coach, just said in the post-match press conference. He said that he's trying to be philosophical about it, and he's trying to say to the players, look, actually you should be really proud of your efforts, and I guess that Wales as a nation should be proud of you, and you know, to almost defend, what was it, 115 in that final is an incredible effort from an incredible group of players who should be really, really proud of themselves.
Tammy Beaumont is going to get the Freedom of Wales, is she?
What does that even involve? You can drive your sheep across the Severn Bridge.
Something like that, right?
Okay. Anyway, it's an interesting one because there is a bit of uncertainty, obviously, about the 100 now. We've just, as you said, had a record crowd here at Lords for the women's final, 22,000 people. It's actually a record for any women's match at Lords, and I guess that underlines the importance of this tournament to the growth of women's cricket. But we don't know what's happening next year, do we, Sid? And in particular, there's been reports over the last few days in The Guardian that these 49% stakes that the ECB are selling in the 100 teams are going to amount to a bit more power than what we thought originally.
Yep, and the big question is, what will these teams be called? Because apparently the key to this is that the Mumbai Indians owners, the team that own that team, want to add Lords in particular to their collection. They're very, very keen on owning the kind of prestige side. They see the Mumbai Indians brand as the prestige brand, and they see Lords as the perfect addition to this, and they want to apparently rename them MI London. How's that going to go down with the what are the type Ks, are they, in the Lords, you know, the MCC membership,
yeah.
What do you think they're going to make of that?
Well, there's a consultation meeting coming up in a few weeks' time. I doubt that they're going to be particularly happy about that state of affairs. I think that it's also difficult for the competition as a whole. These are very new brands, very new teams, new names a few years ago. People are just getting used to them, are just starting to embrace them as fans, and then you're going to have, like, you know, 8 new teams created out of nowhere, and that's very difficult actually. And it's not just the London Spirit who it's going to affect potentially. If the naming rights go to these buyers, to these people who are investing, putting foreign money into the 100, then, you know, we're potentially going to see 8 new brand names, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not even the key to it. For me, the real key to the whole thing is the fact that what it suggests is that they're telling us all along, these are 49% stakes. We'll maintain control. There'll still be control. We'll have our 51%, and we'll be in charge. And but people like the Mumbai Indians are going, well, you know, we're prepared to put in a lot of money, and apparently it is a lot of money. People aren't putting numbers on it, but people up there in the press box have been talking about very large numbers nonetheless. They're talking about, you know, the Lords being worth almost as much as all the rest of the teams put together. And if they're going to invest those numbers, they're going, well, we want the rights to call them, you know, MI London. We don't want them to be called the London Spirit. And it does look awfully like the ECB are going to cave to this. And, you know, at that point, what's your 51% stake worth if you can just rename the team however you want? You know, and in 2 years' time, are the team going to be, you know, renamed the Dream 11 MI London? You know, how are we going to do anything to restrict the power of, you know, the people that are coming in, which we've repeatedly been told, you know, these people are going to be minority stakeholders. It really now looks like they're going to be minority stakeholders, but with the power to do anything they want. and I feel quite uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely, so do I, and I really think it smacks of that the ECB have been receiving offers on these 49% stakes, and the offers haven't been high enough. So they're going, well, hang on a minute, we probably can't kind of sell the idea of selling a majority stake to the existing people who need to vote in favour of this, the men's counties. But what we can do is instead offer the people who are buying these stakes a bit more power, a bit more authority. And as you say, where does that end? So yeah, you're kind of you're telling people on the one hand, well, you might only have 49%, but you're going to have all of this authority, but you're then selling it to people here as, oh, it doesn't matter because they've only got 49% stake. So which is it? And I agree with you, it makes me really uncomfortable and quite nervous because, you know, we don't know who could end up owning these stakes a few years down the line, right, Sid?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very interested to know what restrictions are going to be put in place. What happens, for example, if the owners of the Mumbai Indians, say there's a big change in the politics of India and the owners of the Mumbai Indians are suddenly nothing like as powerful as they are now politically, and they're forced to sell this. They could sell it to absolutely anybody, right? And at that point, what restrictions are going to be put in place to prevent, you know, Lords effectively being bought for a month a year by somebody like Gazprom, the Russian, you know, oil giant? But, you know, we need to be reassured that there are some restrictions in place to prevent those kind of cases happening, especially if these de facto 49% stakes are actually going to be full control, because we certainly don't want them to be called the Gazprom Mumbai Indians or the Gazprom Spirit or whatever, wherever we wind up. So there is a lot to be concerned about, and it's important that we as journalists continue to ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Shall we move on from the 100 though, because I've just mentioned that Bangladesh World Cup, which is obviously very much on the agenda. It's about 5 weeks now until the first warm-up match is meant to be being played, currently still scheduled for Bangladesh, but there's been lots of reports this week about what the ICC might do. The two countries who seem to be in the running for it to be moved to because of this unrest that's happening in Bangladesh, and the fact that the UK, Australia, New Zealand and I think other governments are basically saying don't travel, our players cannot travel to Bangladesh, okay? So that means that the ICC have really got to think very seriously about moving it. So the two countries who seem to be in the running are the UAE now and Zimbabwe, according to reports on CRICKETher.
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, I just had a conversation with someone up in the press box that's got a lot of contacts in Bangladesh cricket, and they agreed that what they were hearing was that Bangladesh have been told that they're not the World Cup is not going to Bangladesh. So that seems that Bangladesh have been told that. There's an ICC meeting next week apparently where it looks like they're going to formalise that and, you know, hopefully sign on the dotted line to see where they're going to take it. Where is it going to go? Is it going to go to Zimbabwe? Well, Zimbabwe have certainly thrown their hat into the ring and they've said, look guys, we're available, we can take this, we can do it. But I think the consensus seems to be very much that the ICC have already decided it's going to be in the UAE, and because that's the easy thing for them to do, because, you know, there's a couple of big stadiums there, there's plenty of hotel capacity, they can get the teams in. Yeah, the stadiums will probably be pretty much empty, but I think they've accepted that's going to be a price to pay, but it will allow them to go ahead with the World Cup, you know, in pretty much exactly the format that it would have otherwise gone ahead with.
Yeah, because the alternative would be moving it in terms of when it's going to happen, okay, and that would be even more disruptive given how intense the women's international schedule is now. So yeah, UAE. Heather Knight's actually just been asked about this in the post-match press conference, and she suggested, or it was UAE that she mentioned, because somebody said, are you going to change your strategy? It's a bit frustrating that you've done all of this build-up prepping to go to Bangladesh and now you're potentially going to end up somewhere else. And she very much said, well, UAE, if it's moved to UAE, then we don't mind too much. We think the conditions are going to be quite similar. I think this is really interesting actually, because as we've kind of talked about at length, all of the preparation that England have done is to find themselves in Bangladesh. Heather Knight faking having Delhi belly and sitting out one of the New Zealand series, one of the New Zealand matches, was about her prepping the team for what if that happened if you're in Bangladesh. I do think that the UAE is a different set of circumstances potentially, and then it will be frustrating, but the Heather Knight is not going to admit that publicly. But there you go. I mean, I guess the other thing that it does, right, is it gives John Lewis a face-saving opportunity to look at some of the performances in the 100 and go, hang on a minute, the squad that I did tell everybody I was thinking about taking is going to be quite different, and I'm going to save face because I can now select a totally different squad because we're going somewhere else, and it's without of my control.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the other question mark about the moving it from Bangladesh is that England's warm-up fixtures, or England's kind of intra-squad warm-up, is meant to be in the UAE, right? So what does that potentially mean for England?
Yeah, and this potentially has knock-on impacts because if England are unable to go ahead with their warm-up programme as they figured, it might well change the way that they approach this Tour of Ireland that's coming up. So we've got a Tour of Ireland coming up. We'll be heading to Ireland for 3 ODIs and a couple of T20s. They're in Belfast and Dublin. And originally, England said they were going to very much send a B team for these fixtures. But if these turn out to be the only fixtures and the only warm-up preparation they're potentially going to get before the World Cup in the UAE, because their other plans get disrupted by the fact that these stadiums are going to be repurposed for the World Cup, then perhaps we'll see a very, very different team go to Ireland to take on Ireland, particularly in those T20s.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? And I guess that it might be done on a case-by-case basis, and it might be based on who's had a good 100 and who hasn't. You know, Nat Sciver-Brunt and Heather Knight probably don't need any more time in the middle ahead of the World Cup, but a lot of the other players potentially do.
Yep.
Okay, well, anyway, we think that the ICC is going to make an announcement this week, as you say, so I guess that we'll be discussing that in next week's episode. Sid, I also wanted to talk about another potential bit of news that relates to an international tournament, but that isn't a cricket-specific international tournament, and that is the Commonwealth Games. The next Commonwealth Games is scheduled to be in 2026. It was going to be in Victoria, in Australia, but they pulled out a little while ago, and there was all kinds of question marks about whether we were going to get a Commonwealth Games at all.
Are we going to get a Commonwealth Games?
Well, sources, reliable, good sources, are saying that Scotland have offered to host the 2026 Commonwealth Games. Now, Scotland hosted the Commonwealth Games recently, 2014, in Glasgow, very successfully, so they've got a lot of the facilities up there, but women's cricket was in the last Commonwealth Games in Birmingham for the first time. What else is happening in summer 2026, July, August, when that would have to be the period when Scotland would be hosting the Commonwealth Games? Well, it's our home T20 World Cup that England and Wales are hosting. How is that going to work?
Well, it's going to work quite easily because we'll do it after the T20 World Cup, because there's nothing going on after the T20 World Cup, right, Raf?
I mean, yeah, nothing happens in August, right? Well, obviously it's going to clash with the 100 if they try to move it.
Oh, it's a good job we haven't sold the 100 to third parties then that are expecting it to all happen in August, right, Raf?
Yes, Sid. Well, we haven't yet, but we probably will have by summer 2026. It's all a big mess, and it's great for the Commonwealth Games, but cricket, I think women's cricket may have to resign itself to the fact that the international schedule is too intense now, and they won't be able to find a window to play this, let alone where are they going to find a place in Scotland that's kind of big enough to host all of these women cricketers and these kind of international women's cricket matches. I mean, it's a shame because I think it could have been really exciting for Scotland to host a women's cricket event at the Commonwealth Games, and certainly would have attracted a lot of interest from down south, from England and Wales, people travelling up to Scotland to see these matches. But
Scotland would of course have been able to, you know, play in that tournament.
Absolutely, as hosts you would think they would be kind of guaranteed to play in it, but it feels to me that the most likely thing from here is that the Commonwealth Games Federation say, I'm sorry guys, first in, last out, we haven't got people who want to host it, you know, we haven't got very many people coming forward because it's very expensive, we need to slim it down. And women's cricket, well, if you're presenting us with problems about the schedule, you're an easy event to get rid of. Sorry.
Well, we'll see.
We will. I understand that an announcement is due imminently within the next week or two about this new Scotland Commonwealth Games. So again, we'll bring you all of the updates on future episodes of the CRICKETher Weekly. Finally this week, Sid, there have been more developments in what we're still referring to, I think, as Project Darwin, i.e. the domestic restructure next year. And we've had some announcements by Yorkshire, one in particular about their head coach. So Yorkshire have a new head coach who's apparently been appointed after a rigorous process, a guy called Richard Pyra. Now, if people watching or listening to this don't know him, he was actually sacked by Yorkshire in 2021 in the middle of their racism scandal. He was found guilty of making racist comments about an Asian woman. He was handed a 2-week coaching ban, which I don't believe he's served yet, so that could potentially mean he's starting a little bit later. He was handed a £2,500 fine by the Cricket Discipline Commission in May 2023. They found it proven that he'd used racist and discriminatory language about Asian women. I don't want to repeat the comment that he'd made because it's very offensive, but if you Google him, then you will be able to find out. So what do we make of this, Sid?
Well, it's a very difficult one, and I think that it's important to be clear that we don't think that anybody should be beyond rehabilitation, for these things. That if you're prepared to, stand up and go, look, I said those things, but I was wrong, and I've educated myself, I've changed, I'm not that person anymore, I'm not going to do it again. And interestingly enough, we had a really good example of how to, kind of stand up and take responsibility and apologise this week, not from cricket but from baseball. But I do want to bring this up because I think it's really important. So we're talking about a Boston Red Sox player called Jarren Duran, who during a game he was being yelled at by a spectator who was consistently yelling at him and telling him he was rubbish. He eventually lost his rag and turned around and threw a homophobic insult back at the spectator. Now, obviously this was picked up on the TV cameras and it was a big scandal, and everyone was rightly shocked because he'd done the wrong thing. But what's really important here is how he came out and addressed the issue. Raf, and I think we're going to quote directly from what he said.
Since during tonight's game I used a truly horrific word when responding to a fan. I feel awful knowing how many people I offended and disappointed. I apologise to the entire Red Sox organisation, but more importantly to the entire LGBTQ community. Our young fans are supposed to be able to look up to me as a role model, but tonight I fell far short of that responsibility. And he also said he would use this experience to educate himself and grow as a person.
No, but that's the way to issue an apology. Now, all I'm going to say here is that I've Googled quite carefully and I can see no hint of any apology whatsoever from Richard Pyra. If there is an apology out there, then please direct me to it and we'll be happy to repeat it on the CRICKETher Weekly. But, if there isn't, then maybe there should have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that the other key concern about this is not just that what happened, what occurred was racist, but that it was kind of deeply offensive and misogynistic and sexist, and kind of indicative of some quite disappointing and disrespectful attitudes towards women. And is that the kind of attitude that we want to embrace within the new women's domestic structure? I would have thought that Yorkshire would have been a bit more careful about an appointment like this one, given that there's been quite a lot of discussion and disquiet about the way in which they've kind of talked their way in to Tier 1 in a couple of years' time, in a way that a lot of people think is an unfair kind of change or alteration to the process and to the rules. So you would think that Yorkshire would be being quite careful, and obviously of course as well in the wake of everything awful that happened with the Zebra League. But anyway, Yorkshire gonna Yorkshire or something. Yeah, that's all we have to say on that. Just on a kind of semi-related note, in terms of Yorkshire and the domestic restructure, CRICKETher have reported this week that Lauren Winfield-Hill is going to sign a multi-year deal with Yorkshire. She doesn't appear to have signed it yet, hasn't quite signed on the dotted line, still potentially room for her to pull out at the 11th hour, but based on the quotes in this CRICKETher interview, it doesn't seem likely. She talks at length about being very loyal to Yorkshire, wanting to keep playing her cricket there. She's obviously always played there, and it being really important for her to be able to have friends and family come to watch her playing at Headingley. So that's a big coup for Yorkshire to be able to retain her. It does make me a little bit cross because she actually specifically says if I'd been having to play 2 years in Tier 2, which was the original, or the semi-original plan for Yorkshire, it might have looked different, she says. But I'm not that old, I can hang on for a year or so. So that suggests to me that she possibly wouldn't have been signing for Yorkshire if they hadn't managed to persuade the ECB to change the rules for them a second time. Again, feels to me like Yorkshire being rewarded here for some quite bad behaviour, but hey, I can understand Lauren Winfield-Hill's perspective as well, because I think it's difficult to move from somewhere where you've been playing all of your cricket. She does also talk about the possibility of going on loan for a year in 2025, so that she does get that year in Tier 1 before she comes back to Yorkshire. That hasn't been agreed, but it's a possibility.
Yep.
Right, that's all we've got for this week. We're going to go and not watch the end of the men's 100 final because we're not interested. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we really hope you watch the women's 100 final and that you've got some nails left. Bye bye.
Bye bye.